Alright, now let's combine the last couple lessons together. So, first of all, we'll start with a sphere. And actually, it's probably best if I just use this. And I'm just going to make a gray sphere. And the things to remember are that we have this pattern that forms where you have, highlights and midtones. In the light side, and you have in the shadow side you have the core shadow and reflected light. So that's one point, and then the other point was that if light is coming from a certain direction and it hits a sphere perpendicular to that, it divides, you find the line perpendicular to the direction the light's coming from, and that divides the sphere cleanly in half, or creates 2 points that if you connect them divides the sphere cleanly in half, depending on the angle of the light. If it shifts towards us, then you get more in light, and if it shifts away from us, then you get more in shadow, provided this side is the light side and the other side is the shadow side. Okay, so now let's combine these two and do a bit of shading. So I'm going to select a large soft brush, and let's see, how do I want to do this? Well, one thing I can actually do is just make the whole thing a shadow, in shadow. So I'm going to select this tone, and then remember the way to find the shadow tone is to go from the light tone you've selected to black and then go halfway in between those two. So say that would be the shadow tone. So I can put that down as the shadow. Boom. And then I have the light. So if the light is coming directly from this, the left side, and it's hitting this, it's going to cleanly divide this in half. So I like to start from the light side, the part that's getting hit by the light, and then move towards the shadow. So there we go. Then I can go over it again. Again, whenever I start fresh, I start from this side, and I'm just using a clipping layer to do this. So, and then I go towards that. And then now we have a division between light and shadow, but this is all mid-tone and this is all core shadow. So now let's add in some highlights. So again, starting on this side and there. So now we have highlight, mid-tone, core shadow, and all we're missing is reflected light. So let's get in the reflected light. Now there's no object here. I didn't draw a wall or anything, but I'm still going to add reflected light. And the reason is that on Earth, we always have something that's going to bounce the light around. There are very few cases where you don't get any reflected light, and in those cases you have occlusion shadows. We'll talk about that later. But on Earth, pretty much always, there's always going to be a little bit of reflected light. So you get this kind of, this pattern happening where you have highlight, midtone, or sometimes it's mid-tone highlight, but in this case, because the light's coming directly from this side, the first thing it hits is this surface. So the first plane we hit is right here, then it'll hit that, and that. So you'll always pretty much get reflected light. Now, what is a situation where there is no reflected light? Well, the moon is a good example. And in that case, you'll have the black of the night sky. And then you have the moon, but there is no reflected light. So you get a shape that just looks like something like this maybe. But the important thing to note is that even though there is no reflected light, you still start and end halfway. So if you connected these 2 points, it would divide this halfway into the sphere, and the light is coming from, in this case, it's coming from this direction, right? So if you look at the moon, you'll notice that. You might see some bumps and things, because there's craters, so maybe this line isn't perfectly smooth, but it still divides it halfway. And depending on the phase of the moon, like if it was a full moon, then you actually would see the whole sphere. So that's a case where you don't get reflected light, but usually you do. And so this is a sphere where the light is coming directly from the side. Let's do one where the light's at a bit of an angle. So create a new sphere. I will use probably the same color is fine, and gonna find the shadow color again. So I'm gonna take the mid-tone, open that up, in between that and black to find the shadow. I'm gonna fill it with that. And now, where's the light gonna come from? Let's say the light is coming from this direction. So it's gonna be a bit in the front, slightly turn to the front, and from this. So let's say that's coming from this direction. So what is perpendicular? Well, like that and that. That would divide the sphere in half evenly. And oops. Right, so then instead of starting on this side and then going straight across, so I'm actually starting outside of the sphere and just moving to the right side. Instead of doing that, because that would suggest that the light's coming directly from the side, the light is going to hit first probably a spot like right there. And the separation between light and shadow is probably going to be something more like that. So I'm going to start in the sphere and always start at the lightest part and then move out. And I just want to make sure that this division connects those 2 points. There. So I wouldn't want to do something like this, for instance, where, see, now that line ends at a different part other than this point. That's what you'll sometimes see. You'll sometimes see people do things like that, and it's not right. So you need it to still connect these 2 points. So now we have the midtone, we can get the highlight, and again, the lightest part is going to be within this sphere. It's not going to be right on that edge. So start at the lightest part and sort of blend outward. And then we can get some reflected light. And again, the reflected light is going to be lighter than the core shadow, but not as light as the midtone, not even close. So you can put in the reflected light. And there we go. So now we have another sphere. Now if this was more shiny, what happens in shinier surfaces is that you get a brighter highlight. So you might have like very clear highlight. Can go even brighter than that. And usually what else happens is that there is more of the midtone, more value changes. And your core shadows are sometimes deeper. Right, there's one more thing I wanted to mention about the core shadow. So let's just clean that up because it's a bit messy. But in the core shadow, we're going from, in this case, here. This first sphere, we're going from here to here. This is all core shadow, right? Well, what is going to be the darkest part of the core shadow? Well, imagine the sphere, well, if it is a sphere, then this point directly in front of us is the part that's closest to us, right? So let's say this was a bit bent and I just make a contour line on this side. It would look like this. Something like that, where it's curving around, but the part that's closest to us is this, right in the middle. And the part that's closest to us is going to have the greatest value difference. So usually in a core shadow, the darkest part is the part that is in the middle of that shadow. So the part that's facing towards us the most. And where this comes in handy, if you know this, if you understand this, is that, see already it looks a bit more round just by having the middle part darker, is let's say I was doing a painting of a knee, for instance. So let's say have a knee here, or a leg, and I want this part, the middle, to come forward. Well, I can select a darker tone and put that in the middle, and it's going to appear to come forward. Right? Now this part looks like it's actually towards us. So all these things that I'm talking about, they can pretty much be practically applied in ways that you can use to make your pictures read better. If you want something to look like it comes forward, if you want something to look like it's round, you got to remember how to show the forms, how to separate light and shadow.